This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today I have a UFO related interview. I'll put this gentleman's book up right now. He has a new book out called UFO Investigation, The Age of Disclosure. His name is Richard Lang. I'll tell you some of his credentials as far as a ufologist. He is a FAA licensed commercial pilot with an instrument multi-engine rating. He has a Bachelor of Science degree of Aeronautical Studies. He had a career for 20 years as a senior vice president working in the trust and investment division of commercial banks. He left the banking career to work as a special deputy with the U.S. Marshal Service post 9/11, with the Department of U.S. Homeland Security as a federal liaison, interfacing with airlines and airport authorities. He was also an anti-terrorist advisory council board member and served as a key speaker on terrorism. He was also a lead investigator on the Discovery Channel's TV series UFOs Over Earth. He managed the MUFON/BASS project and STAR teams, which at the time was the most advanced, funded, rapid response UFO investigation team in the world. And in 2012, 2013, he was featured as the lead investigator on the Discovery Channel Canada's TV series, Close Encounters, Season 1, Season 2, and he is the owner of Lang Publishing. Richard Lang, I've been trying to get you on for a few months now. Thank you for finally doing this.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you.
You've been very busy. You just put out this new book, UFO Investigation, The Age of Disclosure, and you have other books. So maybe just before we get into your career, if you could tell us a little bit about this new book that you have out.
Well, this book, we just recently published it. I had published a book earlier about UFO investigation, and it was primarily designed for like advanced training for investigators and people that have been doing research for a long time. This second book was geared more towards the general public. There's a lot less technical information there, and there's a lot more general information about historical events that have occurred and things that are going on right now in Congress as far as the whole concept of disclosure is concerned. So this book was basically written for the general public, people that may be interested in UFOs but really don't know a lot about it and want to learn about it. That's was the intention for building this book.
So you have quite a history, as we just went over some of it. How did you go from working in the banking industry to now being involved in UFO research?
Well, it's kind of the other way around. As you indicated, I've got a degree in aeronautics from Embry-Riddle in Daytona. And when I was young, I was in flight school, and I was flying up the coast of Florida one night by myself in a small single-engine airplane. And I basically got in the middle of a UFO encounter with an airliner and a private jet. And, at that point, I realized that this stuff's what's really going on. And that's what attracted my interest. So it's been a kind of a lifelong thing for me over the last 30, 40 years. Career-wise, I worked in the financial service industry most of my life. And being in the bank trust department, I had a very good, high-paying job that got me a lot of vacation time. I got 6-7 weeks vacation a year, and I had the money where I could go and basically pursue my interests. So I was working in the bank, but all my spare time went to working on this research and interviewing people and being involved with cases of people that had close encounters and that kind of thing, if that makes sense. So basically, the bank paid for my research.
So was that research you were doing kind of just research for you as an individual for your books, or at that point, were you already working with one of the UFO firms that actually formally research this stuff and have government contracts to research this?
Yes. Essentially, what I did is I had belonged to an organization called MUFON. Most people have heard of it. It's the largest UFO research organization in the world. Um, I essentially joined them back in the 80s, and essentially I got certified as an investigator, and I started working on cases through them. And that's basically how I started. Ended up being the chief investigator for MUFON in North Carolina and Virginia both. And at that point, in the 90s, MUFON had created this group called the Star Team, and there was only about 8 or 10 people involved in it, and we were like the really elite, highly experienced investigators were on this team, and I ended up being like the manager for that team. So that's how we got involved with the Discovery Channel shows. Essentially, we were working on some really high-profile cases, and the Discovery Channel had contacted us and wanted to do some shows about UFO cases. So they actually used some of our case material that we had done investigations on, and that's kind of how I got going.
Was it you that reached out to MUFON, or did they see some of your materials and reach out to you about starting to work with them?
Well, essentially, what had happened is Discovery Channel had contacted MUFON, and they basically expressed the desire to work to do some to do some shows on cases, and so then they got us involved, and it was actually Discovery Channel, a producer team that contacted MUFON originally to get that all facilitated.
And you've also given lectures and so forth on actual how people can properly investigate UFOs. What is a typical UFO investigation like for you? What are some of the steps that you take in these cases? I know they can vary greatly.
Well, essentially, what I did in my first book is I put together like a protocol. The first book is basically how to investigate cases. So essentially, most of these cases originate on databases. The two biggest ones that I know of in the world are MUFON's case management system, and then also the National UFO Reporting Center. And essentially what they are is like if you see something or you see a UFO or you have an experience and you want to report it, you go on the website, you go to MUFON, you go to the National UFO Reporting Center, and it'll say, click the button, report the case. And when you do that, a form opens up in there, and it asks you all kinds of information about the case: what happened, when it happened, how you experienced it, what you were feeling, all that kind of stuff. And you can also attach photographs and video and any documents you want to that case report. So once that's done, then the case gets assigned to an investigator. An investigator obviously reviews all the information in the case and then goes out and interviews the person. And some of that is, some of that stuff is part of that process is to sort through some of the scammers, because some people put stuff up on that's just false, and they're doing it for attention or whatever. So, a lot of times people report cases and then investigators go out and realize that what they were saying really wasn't what happened. The other thing is that probably 85% of those cases that we send somebody out to work on, we'll find some rational explanation for it. It could be somebody saw something in the sky. Well, for a long time, the space station at night, you could see it when it was in the night sky, on a clear night sky. And sometimes people will see things, and then when investigators look at it, it could be an unusual formation of planets that are just in, at certain times, Jupiter and Saturn can come together and makes this huge display in the sky, which is really creepy looking, but it's explainable. 10 to 15% of the time, though, some of those cases have really serious merit, and essentially they're things that happen that are not explained by rational physics types things. And another thing I was going to tell you too is, as far as my career goes, probably the most outstanding thing I've done is you mentioned that in 2009, Bigelow Aerospace, it's Bigelow Aerospace Applied Space Sciences, which is a sister company for Bigelow Aerospace, basically went to MUFON and worked out a deal to share information. And so essentially what they were doing is they wanted to take a look at these case reports that were coming in. I mean, at that time, MUFON, we're getting 800 case reports coming in every month. So what we did is we put together a team of people. This was all paid. Everybody was paid, including me. And we had a group of people, we called them dispatchers. And essentially what they would do is they would go through this database every night or day when the cases came in. They would review them for accuracy and content and that kind of thing. And, you get 800 cases a month. Okay. And a case report could be anything from, a 76-year-old grandfather sitting out on the back porch and saw a light in the sky. Or it could be an airline pilot had a close encounter with something that was twice as big as his airplane in his flight path. So obviously you're going to want to work on the case with the airline pilot. So essentially what we did is went through all those cases, and out of 800 cases a month, they probably come up with about 40 or 50 of them that were really good cases. And then once we got that far, then I would actually I ran the program, and I deploy investigators to go out and meet with these people, investigate the cases, and then we'd write case reports and send them back to BASS, which we didn't realize at the time, but they were basically being funded by the ATIP program through the Pentagon, the Defense Intelligence Agency. Did that sort of answer what you were asking me?
Yeah, and I was actually just going to ask you about Bigelow Aerospace, because obviously Robert Bigelow, for anyone that doesn't know, he's an extremely rich man. He was from the hotel industry. He started doing this research himself. And I guess now he's developing, from what I understand, like space hotels type things. But also he's continuing to research UFOs, and he had the actual government contracts to research UFOs for a while, as well as Skinwalker Ranch. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about Bigelow Aerospace, a little bit more for people who aren't familiar with it.
Sure. So Bigelow Aerospace it's a government contractor, a defense contractor. It's out in Las Vegas, and they have a huge facility there, including an underground facility where they do research. And in Bigelow Aerospace, basically, their thing was building modules for space, like deploying, modules where they would inflate and open up, and they'd be like living quarters for astronauts and things like that. But kind of behind the scenes, they had done some contract work with the Defense Intelligence Agency, and funding was provided to do this UFO research. The funding came, it was through Congress with Harry Reid, of course, was the person that pushed it. And at that point, they organized this group called BASS, which was, Bigelow Applied Space Sciences, which was like a sister company. And essentially, I worked with them through MUFON when I ran that project for a year. So that's kind of how the thing worked. Now, excuse me, at the same time, Bigelow also owned the Skinwalker Ranch. And there was research that I believe was going on out there the whole time, too. And it's a pretty, it's an incredibly interesting place. George Knapp and Colum Kelleher wrote a book called In Search of the Skinwalker. It's just unbelievable, the phenomena that's happened there. Actually, I did not read that book until after I worked with those guys. And if I didn't know them as well as I did, I wanted to believe the book. That's how wild it is. But I'm quite sure everything in there is true. It's an amazing story. And now there's some TV series about it too. The ranch was sold, and they're running some running some TV series about what's going on out there. It's quite interesting.
Now, one thing about the Skinwalker Ranch is it seems that UFO activity is connected to paranormal activity there. Have you noticed through your research that there is a connection with paranormal and UFO activity as well?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. A couple of years ago, I was invited to speak at the National Paranormal Coalition, and I was there for a couple 3 days, and there was a lot of different individuals there, that a lot of people that do like ghost, ghost hunting type stuff and write books about ghosts and things like that were there. And one of the things I learned was a lot of that phenomena, there's some big similarities between some of that stuff. I mean, if you think about it, some of the old ghost stories from back in the 1800s, and then you compare some of the abduction reports that people talk about now, they might have been not really been ghosts, they might have been ETs. We just don't know, but there's definitely some strange phenomena that occurs in a lot of these cases. In the first book, I tried to convey that. There's several chapters in the book about high strangeness, and what I talk about is your perception of reality. And one of the things I think that happens to someone over the years, when you do this kind of research, you go out and you talk to people that have had abduction experiences. And I can remember early about this stuff, I'd be like, God, this is impossible, and I'd be driving home and thinking, man, I just want to get out of here and go home, and then you go interview another one and another one and another one. And after about 5 or 6 years, you start going, wait a second, these guys are all, they don't know each other. They're not connected in any way, but they're all telling you the same details, which makes me realize that what they're telling you is real. And if that's true, then a lot of the stuff I learned in physics in college is not the way we think it is, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Carlos is wondering what you could tell us about what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch from your own research.
Well, let me just say, first of all, I've not ever been to the Skinwalker Ranch. I was working on that project, and at the same time, some of the guys at Bigelow were out there on the ranch. I'm pretty sure that was happening. But essentially, if what it amounts to is there's just some very, very strange paranormal things that happen there. I think that probably it's like a interdimensional portal. And I can't really explain it other than to say that there's things that happen there. There's portals open, and there's some kind of a pathway to another dimensional reality outside ours. And there's just some very weird stuff that happened there. And I think going forward, I mean, there's still they're with the TV show and everything out there, they're still looking at that stuff. And what I can tell you is if you read that book that George Knapp and Colin Kelleher wrote, it's just incredible. They've got extremely high detail in there, what happened and how it happened, and it's just really, really interesting.
What would your theory be about why all that activity is happening there? We've heard a lot of theories that there might be like a interdimensional blip or something, some sort of portal for that area, but I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
Well, in the book, I try to distinguish that a little bit too, because when we talk about interdimensional portals, there's typically some high strangeness activity, but it's associated with a place, as opposed to a UFO abduction where there's a craft of some kind either on the ground or hovering near where the person's abducted. So the interdimensional portals are somehow associated with a place, a geometric location. And I would think that there's a lot more of them than we probably realize. Some of the research that's being done in the national parks, like people just disappearing, it's unbelievable. Like thousands of people, in some of these national parks, they just disappear without a trace. And it's interesting that some of the research, and I'm not an expert in that area, I just find it fascinating. But, basically this happens in certain areas where, a woman will disappear, and then 5 years later, another guy will disappear within 1,000 yards of where the first one did, that kind of thing. So there's something there. I just don't completely understand it either.
Rob Alexander is wondering, what has been your closest encounter with a UFO?
If he means personally with me, again, I'm an investigator. And so, I don't really, my claim to fame is not having been involved in that many close encounters. But essentially, when I was young, I was flying up the coast in Florida, and I heard these airline pilots contacting the air traffic controllers. And I was out over the ocean where I could still see the beach and the lights. It's a stunning ride to go up there at night, about 2,000 or 3,000 feet. Flying up there, and I'm listening to radio traffic. And so I'm listening to these pilots talking, and usually you've got two radios. One radio is tuned to where you just came from, and the other radio is tuned to the next place you're going. So you're listening to two radios. So I'm hearing these pilots talking, and this pilot calls in, and he said, "I've got traffic in my flight path," and he's talking to an air traffic controller. Air traffic controller comes back, goes, negative radar contact, no, you know. So a few minutes later, the pilot calls back again. He goes, "Look, we have traffic. We have visual, which means they can see it, of an object in our flight path." And the controller comes back, "Oh, negative radar contact," you know. And at this point, you could tell the guy's getting ticked off. And he goes, "Look, there's something huge, unconventional, hovering over the ocean, slowly rotating with multicolored lights on it." And then it gets quiet for a minute, and then another pilot from a business jet calls in and says, "We have a visual on the same object as Eastern does," you know. And the traffic controllers kept saying negative radar contact. They wouldn't admit that they could see it. So my job, basically that night, my flight, I was going to Jacksonville, and I was just going to go up, land, get gas, go back. And so when I get to Jacksonville, which at that time was it was a naval air station, so there was military traffic and civilian commercial traffic going in that airport at the same time. So when I called them to land up there, they wouldn't let me land. And they just said, maintain holding. They want me to fly around a circle for departing military traffic. So I'm sitting up there, you know, flying around, looking around, and all of a sudden I see these two fighter jets come screaming off that runway, you know, one like right behind the other, a little off to the side, and they went right out over the ocean. You could hear them blowing through the sound barrier. You could see them all lit up in afterburners, and they were going right out to where that object was that those pilots were talking about. So the thing I learned that night was basically the traffic controllers wouldn't acknowledge it was there when they talked to the pilots, but you know, when they dispatched two fighter jets out to check it out, they knew it was there. They just didn't want to talk about it on the radio. So that was kind of like my first lesson in ufology.
Carlos just has a follow-up question going back to your Skinwalker Ranch comment. In your opinion, he's wondering if it's more paranormal or extraterrestrial.
Oh, good question. I think that, first of all, let's define the parameters, okay? Most people, when they say paranormal, they're talking about something that's just like strangeness in maybe another dimensional reality or something like that. Extraterrestrial is it's associated with some intelligent life force off planet, okay? I think sometimes both of those things are in play, because again, in my first book, I talked a lot about the multidimensional realities, you know, time-space realities. And essentially what we're living in this third dimensional reality, but there's other dimensions that simultaneously exist here at the same time. We just can't see them because we're not tuned into their frequency. It's almost like if you go to your television, you turn your TV on, you put it on one channel, and you can watch that channel and you're tuned into it and you can see and hear everything that's going on there. You switch the channel to a different frequency and you can watch the different channel. You can see what's going on there. Both of those channels and all that broadcasting it exists simultaneously. It's just you can only see the one that your frequency's tuned into. And I think that's, you know, part of our dimensional reality is we operate at a frequency and we're tuned into this third dimensional reality. So when we get out, you know, there's other forces outside of that reality, and things that can disturb that or open that up are like these interdimensional portals, where I think people, you know, you get in these certain areas where the frequencies are skewed, where you're in this reality, but you can all see something from another reality. And yeah, I think that some of the stuff at the Skinwalker Ranch is probably extraterrestrial, only because aside from the portals that have opened, there's been a lot of activity with like orbs that float around there. And those are, you know, orbs are basically these balls of light that fly around, and they're intelligently controlled. And most people, I think, would agree that there's some extraterrestrial presence there. Well, there's probably, but the answer to this question is probably both.
Now, this is a bit of a long question, but in your opinion, what do you think is going on with UFOs? I know they can't all be categorized the same way because there's different types and possibly different intentions, and some might be from other places. They all might not be coming from the same places. But overall, in all your years of research, if you had to sum up what's going on, what would be your theory as far as what's going on?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And I have a pretty definitive answer for that. I think that essentially what's happened is, if you look back in history, go back 1,000 years, and you go into some of these pyramids and ancient caves, there's all kinds of drawings of pictures of saucers and stuff like that in my book. But I think that the extraterrestrial presence has been here a long time. And I don't think it's just restricted to one group or society. I think that there's a number of these societies, extraterrestrial societies or cultures, whatever you want to call them, that have visited Earth and do visit Earth and probably will continue to visit Earth. And I think that they have different agendas. I mean, just based alone on the reports that, when you interview these people and they have encounters, there's a pretty dramatic difference in the type of entities. There's some of these people that these entities look just like us. If you were sitting there having breakfast somewhere, and the guy on across the counter from you, you'd never, if he was, you'd never know it, because he'd look and behave perfectly normal and human. Then there obviously the others, the grays and the ones with the big eyes and the big heads and all that kind of thing. So just based on the fact that that people see different types of species in what I see in these reports that they report, and literally I've looked at thousands of them, and there's definitely different species. One of the things I think that probably in my book, and I talked about this a lot, was that I think that the activity, UFO activity, dramatically increased during about the time Truman was president. And a lot of people believe, and I'm one of them, that I think that that's back when the United States started doing a lot of atomic testing, detonating atomic bombs, and then ultimately destroying 2 cities in Japan with atomic weapons. It seems that the UFO activity dramatically increased during that time period. And yeah, I saw that about Ecclesiastes. Yeah. At the same time, in the World War II era, we had built this really powerful anti-aircraft radar, to prevent a Pearl Harbor type of thing. Well, a lot of us believe that anti-aircraft radar, which is very powerful, would disrupt the, electrogravitic propulsion systems in these saucers and cause them to crash. And I listed in my book, there's like 2 pages of them. There was more than it. Roswell is just like the tip of the iceberg. There were dozens of these crashes that were recovered all over the world. And, the government started to really do the heavy duty research in it. And, that's kind of, where it's at right now. I think that part of this is that we're coming to a point where the government, the Pentagon, they've already started to release information about this. So they're changing their status on it. Up until 4 years ago, this pretty much was taboo. Most radio announcers were afraid to talk about it. Hardly any politicians would talk about it. And for the most part, people like me that go interviews, most of the time they try to make a fool out of you. And that was just the way the American media worked. And all of a sudden we're seeing that dramatically change too, because there's something on the horizon, I think, as far as how that's going.
I've actually heard Tom DeLonge say the same thing, that
Right.
part of the concern that these UFOs might have with nuclear weapons, and why we see them over these nuclear silos, is because the electromagnetic fields can cause them to crash from these nuclear weapons. And he actually even said that some of these weapons that have been tested, so to speak, in space and underwater may actually have been set off to actually intentionally do some stuff to some UFOs that could have been up there by our governments. Did you ever hear anything like that?
Well, I personally don't know Tom DeLonge. I've watched some of his videos, of course, but um, I think that that in my research, there's been a number of people, credible people, mostly military officers, higher ranking military officers that have worked around nuclear installations, and they're all telling you that these things would hover over. That there's cases like out in the out west where these things will hover over a missile silo field and just shut all the nuclear weapons down. And everybody's in there in like total amazement. They just hover over there and they do it. And that's happened many times. And there's a lot of stuff that happens around nuclear weapons storage facilities, like the same kind of thing. So yeah, they're definitely, the ETs are definitely interested in that. You know, I don't have any information as far as how maybe the military might be retaliating about that. I don't know. I don't know.
Now, we also hear various reports like Dr. Stephen Greer, for instance, will say that they all want to help us, and some other people, such as Paul Hellyer, who I interviewed before he unfortunately passed, and this official that came out last year. I believe he was from Israel, about this galactic federation of aliens that supposedly watch over Earth, and their only intentions are to protect us. But I've also read other declassified military reports where it seems there has been evidence that there could have been some harm to humans over the years due to these various craft and some of these alleged abduction incidents. Do you think that we can categorize them all as kind of benevolent and they're not going to do any harm to us? Or is there a potential threat since they are in our airspace? And as far as we know, they're not letting us know who they are. But I've also heard you say in another interview that you do believe that there has been some contact with government officials, and the government officials just aren't telling us.
Yeah. Okay, let's start with that. First of all, I think again, there's multiple species, and I believe that some of those species have been in contact with people in our government for a long time. I remember Edgar Mitchell, who passed before he died. He had given an interview in Europe. I think it was in London somewhere, and he'd never do it in the United States and get away with it, or at least it wouldn't get on TV. But he made the comment that, you know, we've been in contact with extraterrestrial societies for 60 years, and I'm really getting tired of lying about it. You know, a lot of the stuff that I think, here's the underlying thing that makes it more interesting. Okay. And I really think this is what's going on is, yes, the government has been in contact with some of these races, and I think they've traded technology with them. Bottom line is, back in the, you know, and again, I went through all this it's a pretty good history lesson of how UFOs, you know, this whole thing emerged in our country in my book. But essentially, you've got Truman, who's, you know, in the atomic bomb age. These are the guys that built the atomic bomb in total secrecy. They start recovering UFOs. They realize all of a sudden that, you know, this technology that makes these things run is really valuable and can be used for military applications, like they did with the atomic bomb. So all of a sudden, it goes undercover. It gets very secret. There's a record that I have of the senator from New Mexico had a personal meeting with Truman the day after Roswell crash. And after he met with Truman, he went back and contacted all the broadcasting companies and said, if you print one more word about this UFO story, we're going to pull your broadcasting licenses. So they weren't screwing around, and they wanted it quiet, and they wanted it right now quiet. And that's what they did. And they've been getting away with it for a long time. So by the time Eisenhower comes along, you know, with this material they're recovering in these crashes, what they did is they went to these private companies, like there's dozens of them, but like Bell, just for example, they would take material that they found in a UFO crash, for example, fiber optic tubing. Okay. They gave that stuff to Bell Laboratories and basically made a deal with them and said, you do the research, back engineering and the research on this. You can have all the patent rights on it. You can make all the money you want as long as you keep the technology for military industrial applications. And, they went to DuPont and did the same thing. Kelvar was developed from UFO material. All the big microchip companies, IBM, Texas Instruments, there's a half a dozen companies that were involved in that where they got these microchips. And if you don't believe any of that, this was all going on back in the early, in the Eisenhower days. If you just look at those companies and now they're the multi-billion-dollar international corporations of the world, they made a ton of money on this technology. And again, their deal was to try to keep it quiet, and that's what they did. So you've got this unbelievable military industrial complex, the one that Eisenhower warned about, basically running behind the scenes covertly, pretty much running the world as far as technology goes. And so, we had this whole thing that came out last, this report that was supposed to be generated in June. Essentially, the last year, before Trump left office, he signed this big stimulus package. Well, part of the stuff, it's 5,600 pages. Well, part of this stuff that was in there, it was approved by Congress. It was a mandate that, the intelligence agencies had to come forward and tell what they know about UFOs. And so you've got the FBI, the Navy intelligence, and the Defense Intelligence Agency working with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and they're basically under the gun, mandated by Congress to come up with a report. And so they did. So around June 24th, they published a report. Actually, they published two reports. They published one report, which is 9 pages, that got released to the public. And there was another report that was 70 pages that was released to a handful of congressmen under highly secured, top secret, meetings and locations. But the fact that report was coming out, it generated an incredible amount of public interest. And at the same time, what you're seeing with these, with the disclosure the Pentagon's been making, essentially the Pentagon, there's all of a sudden these fighter jet cockpit videos are getting leaked to the public, to the press. In the Washington Post and the New York Times are starting to write articles about them. And, the famous case with the Nimitz, where they had the encounter with the Tic Tacs and the Roosevelt, and all this stuff is coming into the public domain. And at the same time, the Pentagon's spokesmen are coming forward and say, yep, this stuff's real. It's absolutely real, and they won't say where it comes from. They say they don't know, which is crap, but at least they're telling the public that it's real. And that's like a can of worms that once you open it, you can't close it up again. So in the last year or so, they've come out with all this stuff, and basically there's, in since then, there's been dozens of photographs released by Navy, naval. There's one that I put in my book, and it's basically got the cockpit camera. Those cameras in those fighter jets are FLIRs. They're infrared cameras. So people say you can't really tell it's because it's like a heat signature type camera. It works like it's an infrared camera. But there's one picture where the pilot, you can see the object on the FLIR, on the image in the cockpit camera, and then he must have had a cell phone or something. He took a picture of it out of the window of the cockpit, so you can see a photograph of it and the FLIR image of it. And the Pentagon comes along and goes, "Yep, those are real. Those are taken by a naval pilot." So once you start doing that, it opens the whole thing up, and you can't put it back again.
And the people that ask why the cell phone picture is blurry, it's because he's flying at extreme speeds. And also there is other photos that they likely have that just haven't been released to the public because somebody
Absolutely.
leaked those photos that are out there.
There's hundreds. People say, well, if this is real, how come we don't have any pictures of them? I mean, I've seen thousands of pictures of these things. They're out there. But, you try to publish one and some paper will go, oh, this is, it's phony, or they'll get somebody to say it's not real. Up until, and I talked about this in the book a little bit, up until the last couple of years, if you do, basically, here was the rules for TV interviews for UFOs, like what we're doing, or maybe on some primetime channel. Here's what they do. you have an hour show. And so for the first 2/3 of that show, me or whoever it is, I'm on here showing you pictures and talking about what happened and how it happened and giving you all the evidence and everything. Well, the rules were the last 25% of the show has to be done by someone with an adversary view. So what you've got is the last 15 minutes of the show, some guy comes on with a bow tie and a big grin on his face, claiming to have all these scientific credentials, and it basically says that I'm an idiot and everything I said is BS. That's how USA television shows were always done up until the last couple of years. And my experience in Canada was when we were filming up there. When we filmed in Canada, it was a completely different environment because they don't play those games. They were much more interested and much more objective about what we were trying to say.
There's someone on here asking your opinion about the Tic Tac video. And for the people that allege to have debunked it, the government is still saying that it is a legitimate unidentified aerial phenomenon. There's several of those videos, and supposedly those are only small sections of the actual full videos. There's actually longer versions that haven't been released, from my understanding.
Yes. First of all, the Tic Tac videos are those are authentic. Okay. The Defense Intelligence Agency and various offices of the Pentagon, they validated them and verified them there. So here's a short overview of what was going on. You've got the Nimitz and the Roosevelt, and they're out in the Pacific Ocean about 100 miles off the coast of San Diego, and they're doing some maneuvers, doing whatever they do out there, practice maneuvers, or just getting ready to, it's a battle group, maybe getting ready to deploy somewhere. So the Roosevelt had very powerful radar. The Roosevelt's a battleship, and the Nimitz is an aircraft carrier. So the Roosevelt was experiencing the guys in their control tower, their air traffic controllers, were seeing a lot of activity that was up around 80,000 feet. Now, 80,000 feet is higher than commercial airplanes go, and then almost all military planes can't even get that high. That's high. So essentially, they're watching this activity at 80,000 feet, and their radar guys are going, something's wrong here. So they went and brought the tech crews in to recalibrate all their radar because they thought it might be some kind of a malfunction or something. So they completely recalibrate all the radar and set everything up, and they're still there. Well, then what they noticed was they started coming down, and now they had activity at like 30,000 feet. That's where commercial airplanes fly. And so what happened in that event is you've got the Nimitz, and they had launched 2 jets that were doing training maneuvers, and the controllers on the Roosevelt contacted those 2 pilots and asked them both if they were carrying live ordnances, which did they have live weapons. They both said no, and so at that point the controllers dispatched them or directed them, gave them coordinates to go to a location where they talked about a disturbance in the water. Okay. And so when they got to that area is when Fraser, he was talking about these things are like they shaped like a Tic Tac, for lack of something better to call it. And they're about 40 feet across, and they're like zooming around at unbelievable speeds. He said one of them came right across his nose at a speed that was unbelievable and shot right out of sight. Okay. So these things were there. And there was also something going on in the water, which they haven't talked about that much, but there was also a huge craft that was submerging down in the water there. Okay. So I know that whole story and those videos are authentic, and there's more to that I'm just telling you, I'm quite sure that I'm not going to talk about on the air, but I know for a fact that happened.
Right. And again, it wasn't the government that actually initially released those. That was to the Stars Academy that somehow got a hold of them and released it. And then the government later formally released it. And then even later, the Pentagon commented on it, confirming that they were UAPs.
Well, yeah, essentially what you got, TTSA, the Academy of the Stars. I did, part of the chronology or the sequence of events that I'm talking about that's leading up to disclosure. I did some research on TTSA, and essentially what I believe, and I'm quite sure is that TTSA was really created to bring out this information. And if you look at it, all the people like Putoff and that were involved in that are all like highly they're way high up in the intelligence agencies. And what they did is they got together, they got along, and I think part of his deal was they thought that might make it more interesting or palatable to the younger group, which was probably smart to do. But basically, they created this group, and their role was to just start disclosing information. And if you look at some of their the stuff that they're saying behind the scenes, they claim that they were created to do that, and they actually deliberately did disclose the information. They got the leaks. They put the fighter jet cockpit pilot videos out in the public. They gave the information to the people that wrote at the Washington Post and the New York Times. And they were responsible for that. They claim that they were the ones that released that information, and that's what their job was, basically.
Derek has a question for you. He's wondering what you think of the Gnome, Alaska incident where a psychologist's daughter was abducted allegedly by UFO. If you've heard.
I'm not sure which case he's talking about. Is he talking about the one where it was called The Fourth Kind or something like that? They made a movie about it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll see if he can follow up on that, but let's assume it was that one.
Yeah, that was just a case that it was a really interesting movie, but essentially a psychologist was involved in a UFO abduction. There was a lot of like very strange things that happened, and the woman ended up in a psychiatric hospital over it. It was really very sad. Husband committed suicide. It was a really nasty mess.
Now, you've interviewed a lot of alleged abductees. I've heard you say, after all these years of doing it, you can pretty much tell who's doing it for attention and who has legitimately had something happen to them. What do you think about these abduction stories?
Well, for the most part, the people that I've been involved with, that I've spent any time with, I'm quite sure that what they're saying is true. For sure, they believe it's true. The thing is that I used to say that I think I articulated it in my first book, but if you go out to interview someone and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, look, I want to make sure that I get all the patent rights if anything gets written about this, and if we get on Larry King Live, I get credit for every, and as soon as they start talking like that, it's like, I know I'm wasting my time and I leave. By the same token, you meet somebody. I once talked with a member of Congress, and here's how the conversation went. The guy said, look, my brother and I, we had this experience. It was on our farm, and I'm going to tell you about it because it freaked me out and I want to talk to somebody about it. But if you ever tell anybody or use my name, I'll deny I ever heard from you. I won't talk about it, and I don't want any public attention. I'd want to talk to somebody. And the guy's like all shook up and scared when he's telling me. So when somebody's like that, then you're probably going to learn something. You know what I'm saying? Most of the people that these are everyday people, and for the most part, they're honest, hardworking people. Some of them have careers, political or medical careers, stuff like that, and there's no reason for them to lie about any of this. I mean, they already have everything they want and need, and they don't they're not going anywhere with it. So usually a lot of that has to do with what somebody tells you, and every time you deal with these people, you just get a little more insight into what's going on. I would say, just going back to what you said about Stephen Greer, I've met Stephen Greer, and I think he's a really smart guy, and I really admire a lot of the work he's done. And of course, his thing is, in general, he's saying that these entities are benevolent, and I think for the most part that's true. And the reason I say that is because they have unbelievable technology that they could have wiped us off the face of the earth anytime they wanted to. And the fact that they haven't done it sort of tells you that they're not, if they wanted to hurt us, they'd have already done it by now. That's my theory.
So what do you think they are doing when they are doing these abductions? Is it just research?
That's a great question. I think there's some kind of biological research going on there. And also, it seems like, that's been around for a long time. I just published a book for a gentleman, Fran Ridge, who was out in the Midwest, and he published a book about UFO encounters, like in the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s. It's a really cool book, and I got to know him really well. But some of these guys, when you talk to them, it seems like right now things have cooled off a little bit. And by that I mean we're not seeing the abduction stories like we used to. Okay, now there's two schools of thought on this, and one is that the abductions are slowing down, or they're not doing them anymore, or the government's getting much clever and sneakier about covering them up so we don't find out about them. And I'm not sure which one's actually happening.
Phil says New England is a hotbed for UFO activity. He mentions the Betty and Barney Hills story, and the oldest flying saucer picture was taken in 1897 in Mount Washington. He's wondering if there's any geographic attractions related to UFO sightings.
That's a good question. A lot of people ask that. One of the things when we were running our STAR team, we had like this big map that we did, and we had a guy that all these really good cases that we worked on and that we knew about, we were putting little dots on the map, to try to see if there was any correlation with location. We did that for 3 years. Excuse me. And what we found was that in the areas that they're highly populated is where you get the most UFO reports. For example, out in the around the desert where there isn't anybody, you don't get any reports. But if you look like, the interstate corridors going up from Tucson to Phoenix, there's a lot of sightings around there because there's a lot of people and there's a lot of cars there and there's a lot of people moving around in those areas. So what we found, at least from what we concluded, was that it's not really that they're all over the place, but the sighting reports, remember, you have to have a person there to see it. In the more highly populated areas seem to get the most reports for what that's worth. Out in California, there's a lot more reports than there are in in the Sahara Desert somewhere. You know what I'm saying?
Of course, just as we talked about the Tic Tac incidents earlier, they were over water. We always hear about this connection between UFOs and water. Most of them are able to submerge and operate underwater. Unlike vehicles that we have, we don't really have any that are known to operate above water, outside of the atmosphere and in our atmosphere. What do you think the connection is to UFOs and water?
Well, the answer to that question is they're transmedian vehicles. I touched on that in my book, but a transmedium vehicle means it can go through the air, it can go through water, and sometimes it can right through solid material. There's cases where you see pictures of these UFOs like going into a mountainside and it just goes right in, it's not a crash. It's just like a rock slipping into the water. It just goes right into there. And the same thing, it's called USOs, unidentified submerged objects. And the Navy and the Coast Guard have had their share of encounters with these things. But bottom line is, when you're talking about water and our technology, it's kind of like aerodynamics. Something can only move through the water so fast because the water has to displace around it. So, for example, a torpedo might be limited to, maybe 45 miles an hour or something like that. So the fastest thing that's going to go underwater is 45, 50 miles an hour at the max. Okay. And these guys are tracking this stuff on radar going 300 miles an hour under the water. If that, so that they have a technology or the way to do that obviously works. And also with the incident with the Tic Tacs and with the Nimitz and the Roosevelt, there were other reports that I read that in the people that wrote them are not going to have any public contact, don't want any. But basically, when they went out there was other pilots involved in that thing with the Roosevelt. When they went out there was essentially something that was submerging into the water. And it was big, like maybe a couple 100 yards in diameter, and they could see that it was going down in. You could see the water foaming up around it and that kind of thing. So there was some kind of a mothership, if you will, involved in that. They haven't really talked about that much in the public domain.
Now, Carlos has another good question. If the UFOs want to help us, like some people have said so much, why don't they actually just come forward and help us?
Yeah, that's a good question too, and I think that my answer would be they probably already are, and by that, I mean, there are a lot of people that, in Greer's group, they call them CE5 encounters, where these people basically go out somewhere remotely and they just sit quietly and meditate, and they get in contact with some of these, entities. And I think some of these people, I think there's people out there that are getting some kind of contact from them in learning stuff. Most of the people that have these kind of encounters, it's things that they're talking about, futuristic things, and a lot of concern about the damage to the planet, obviously with nuclear weapons, and the industrial control of things and that kind of stuff. But I think they probably have. And if you really want to get into it, and I haven't really done that yet, but is to go to some of these places like the Monroe Institute, which basically was a psychic research center, and now they do a lot of really awesome public classes. And when you essentially, to find your answer, you got to get out of this, the nuts and bolts type thinking, if that makes sense. I remember reading something where Tesla said that when science starts to study the non-physical aspects of some of this stuff, in a very short period of years, they'll advance like 1,000 years in technology. So the way to learn more about that is probably to do some of these things where people can look at the out of body experiences and the deep meditation and stuff like that, to learn more about themselves and their spiritual, their consciousness.
Pubert would like to know what your thoughts are on the MJ12 documents. Are they real in your opinion?
You froze up here for a second.
Okay, Pubert.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
Yeah. I talked about this at length in my book, and part of the history of UFOs, particularly in the Truman administration. The Majestic 12 group was created by Truman and Forstall. And essentially what they did was they created a group of people. There were some military people, government people, and half of them, to my surprise, when I did the research, came from the Commission on Foreign Relations, which is still a very powerful group, global group that it's an American think type group, but the who's who of everybody and anybody that's involved in money and power and government, it belongs to it. And half the people that were part of the original MJ12 group were from the Commission on Foreign Relations. I've got about a half a chapter talking about how that all came up and how it was how it happened. But it's that's for sure, and it still goes on today too. I mean, I'm sure there's a very small group that have a lot of control about what's going on with the government and so forth. But again, when I was talking to George, and we were talking about the whole thing with disclosure, again, it's a two-pronged thing, because what the government knows about this stuff is, back in the 60s, they farmed a lot of this technology out to these multinational defense contractors, and now they're the ones that have control of the technology and the information about what's really going on. So at some point, the government's going to say, yeah, here's what we know about it. And maybe there's a lot they don't know, because, IBM and Bell Laboratories and a dozen other companies have all this secret technology they've developed, and they're not going to hand it over as long as they don't have to. I remember, and again, this was in England, and I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but the guy that was CEO for IBM had retired. It was about 7 or 8 years ago. And he did a speech that was televised. And basically he came out and said that, the original microchip technology that was developed from wreckage that was recovered from extraterrestrial spacecraft. I mean, he just came around and said that, again, if you did that in the United States, they wouldn't put it on TV. They might now, but they wouldn't have then.
And Elon Musk last year put out a tweet saying that the pyramids were created by aliens. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but with him trying to work on the project of colonizing Mars, he would be privy to more information from the government than your average person, you would think.
Well, and you don't have to have privy information from the government. All you got to do is, if you look at the technology that went into building the Great Pyramids in Giza, those there was a documentary a few years ago, in this industrial company that does, like, has these huge cranes and stuff, and those stones, some of those stones are 100 tons. We don't have a crane that can pick up 100-ton stone. There is no such thing on this planet. They're not that big. And then when you look at these stones, they're cut so precisely that you can't stick a razor blade in the crack between the two stones. Now, how'd they do that back then? We couldn't even hardly do that now. You're talking about something cut with a laser and, some real high technology stuff. And not to mention, then, how did you move the stone from the quarry, which was 12 miles away, to where the pyramid's built? 100-ton stone. And no, they didn't put it on mud and slide it and roll it around on logs. That's complete crap. So somebody else was involved in it.
Now, Carlos is asking where people can order your book. I did put the link to his book in the description, but maybe you could take this time now to tell us about the books you have out, and anyone that wants to order it, the direct Amazon link is in the description of this video, and I'll also pin it to the top of the comments after this interview is over.
Yeah, thank you. Essentially, if you go onto Amazon, if you just type in UFO Investigation in my name, the book will come up. All the books are linked together. So whichever book you pull up, you'll see the other books listed right underneath them, like as a series. And a lot of the, just as an update, a lot of the comments that I've gotten about the two books, the first book was basically more technical, designed for people that investigate UFO cases, that are like advanced training and advanced training for researchers. And there's a lot of technological stuff in there about equipment that's used and how to set the lenses and all that kind of thing. And the second book is written more for public disclosure about what I think is going to happen in the next couple of years, as far as getting closer and closer to the full disclosure thing. Now, I've got like a sequence or a stairway of what I think is going to happen. Also, we're working on a third book. I think I mentioned that basically we've gotten a lot of comments from people asking about cases. So what I'm doing is I'm writing a third book, which is basically a collection of short stories. And some of the stuff, I'm redacted the names and changed the names and the places just to protect people's privacy and stuff like that. But what it's going to be well, we'll see how it goes. I'll write a second one if that one does well, but it'll probably be about 25, 30 chapters. And each chapter will be, a story or a narrative, like, here's what happened, here's how it happened. And my goal is to make sure that all the high strangeness and the creepiness and the weirdness of it is totally conveyed in the book. And I think that'll be interesting. A lot of people like to read those kind of stories, and it'll be fun writing it too. So, but yeah, if you go on Amazon, and also on my website, it's langpublication.com. If you go on my website, there's links to buy the books. There's more information about my bio and some of the other books that we're getting ready to do too, and what we do. We basically publish books for, my role, my business is we publish books for people that want to self-publish. So they basically send me a manuscript. We put it all together, format it, get it on Amazon for them, and then, they collect the royalties and all that. That's what we do.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned in one of your books, you go through the steps of how you think disclosure is going to happen. Obviously, it seems like they're already taking the first steps towards that. With how people have reacted to COVID, there was a lot of craziness that happened over the past few years. Do you think that the world is really ready to accept that there might be all this stuff legitimately going on, and we might not be the highest power in the universe?
Well, exactly. And that's really where I was going. The second book, the last couple of chapters is that's what I'm dealing with. And the way I try to relate that is if you remember back, and I researched it, and there's a little bit of information about it, but back in like 1938, Orson Welles did this radio show, and it was a spoof, but they basically started out the radio show, and then they kept breaking in with bulletins how this UFO had landed in New Jersey, and then then another bulletin would come on, oh, they're landing all over the country, and the military can't do anything about it, and and this radio show's going on, and the announcer, he's sitting there pretending like he's choking on poison gas because they're landing in New York and all this stuff. And eventually actually what happened was it caused such a panic that the police stations, their phones are blowing up. People are calling the police stations. People are literally leaving their homes, jumping in their cars and trying to get out of town. And there were these like massive traffic jams and people driving crazy. And the police were like overwhelmed. It was like a nightmare. And they got to the point where they went to the radio station, which I didn't know at the time until I researched, but the police actually went to the radio station, tried to get them to stop the radio show because there was such mayhem going on. People are like in New York were trying to get out of town and out of New Jersey. It was like insane. And so my point in bringing that up is I don't think that the people that are in control of this information are going to be able to be dumb enough to make that mistake again. So what I think they're doing is they're going to give it to you a little bit at a time. And it's kind of like a process of educating people. First, we come out and we say, here's some pictures of these UFOs. Here's these fighter jet pilots' pictures. And these are real. We don't know where they come from, but we know they're real. And we think they might be a threat because they're buzzing around our military bases and they're in our classified airspace, and they don't have our permission. Because there are areas where you've got classified airspace, you're not allowed to fly in there, and they just do whatever they want. And they obviously don't contact the control tower and let them know they're coming through. And that the military doesn't like that. And understandably. So the first phase is to just, okay, this is real. That report that came out in my book, I analyzed it page by page, 9 pages. And they don't come out and even admit that any of this could be extraterrestrial. It's weather balloon, swamp gas, all that kind of stuff. But they do say it's real and it's high technology, and that their pilots, that technology that's way advanced from our aviation. And so that's the first step. It's real and it's happening. Okay. And then, and I said, I tried to convey in my book that a lot of people who are seeing this stuff now are thinking this is just starting to happen. In fact, it's been going on for 70 years. And so the next thing you're going to have to do is take them up the next step to talk a little bit more about the technology. And somewhere about halfway up the stairway, we're going to start talking about the possibility that it might come from another planet and that they're intelligently controlled, and then work your way up to where at some point the people are prepared to deal with the fact that we're not alone here, and that, we might want to be nice to these guys if we have a chance to have encounters with them, which I'm sure we will. But it's going to be that's my whole point in my book, is it's going to be a process of disclosure, and it's going to take some time to get people acclimated to it. And I remember President Reagan had done, when the movie E.T. came out, they had done a premiere at the White House, we're at the party and everybody's watching the movie, and Reagan turns around and there's a couple people standing around, and he goes, there's only 6 people in this room that realize how true this is. And that's pretty well documented. But the movie, a lot of people of us watched the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It came out in 1980. And now there's documentary and evidence indicating that actually happened at an Air Force base. And a lot of the information that they conveyed in that movie, I watched it when it came out, and then I recently watched it again, and I was like amazed. There's so much detail in that movie that I've seen over the years in my research that, they really put a lot of information into that it obviously went over my head the first time, but I can see that there's a lot of that stuff in there that's pretty cool and interesting.
What is your thoughts on the cattle mutilation and other animal mutilation phenomena? That's one of the phenomena that has been observed at Skinwalker Ranch, but obviously all over the world, not just in the US. It's also happened in Canada, where basically it looks like these animals have had the blood sucked out of them with no trace of blood, and have had their eyes cut out and skin around the jaw lines cut out using surgical instruments, with not much evidence being left as to what's happened.
And I probably shouldn't say this on air, but there's been several cases where that's happened with humans too. I have some pictures. I've seen some pictures of them. It's pretty gruesome.
The Brazilian one is the only one I've heard about, but as you said, there's probably others out there you may have seen in your research.
Female in France like that too, fairly recently, but for the most part, that stuff never hits the public domain. I don't know if it's really happening that much, and they're keeping it quiet because obviously that would be very dangerous information. People get real upset and panicked about that. But the cattle mutilations, they obviously do occur, and you know, some researchers think that there's some military activity in that, and I really don't know for sure. But a lot of researchers think that there's some that's being done by you know, terrestrial military operations. But it's nasty business. I know guys that have done that kind of work, and you know, there's no way I'm going down there at 100 degrees and dig through an animal's carcass that's been sitting out in the sun for 2 weeks. You know, it's just like that's nasty business. Tough work.
And it seems like, at least in that Brazilian reservoir case and many of the animal mutilation cases, that the researchers have found that these things often will die from pain. It seems like they haven't actually been killed before these procedures happen.
Yeah, again, I'm not an expert on mutilations, but I know that's in the research. I've heard that and seen it, you know, written. Creepy.
Now, one of the researchers that does say that this has actually been caused by our own military and other military. Well, actually, Stephen Greer believes that it's been the U.S. military doing them all over the world, which I find hard to believe, and that some abductions have also been caused by our own military using deformed humans and little people and so forth. What's your opinion on that? You mentioned that you're not an expert.
Well, the you know, I mean, if you just take a look at it, okay. So guy's got a farm, and there's a cow out there, and so obviously they take it somewhere to do it, because a lot of times they end up being dropped, and there's evidence where they hit the ground, you know. But you would think that if they were going to do something like that, rather than terrorize people, they would just take the cow, do whatever they want to them, and drop them out in the oceans. You know, if you have the capability to fly like they do, just take them out and drop them in the ocean somewhere where it wouldn't cause so much of a fiasco. But they seem to make sure they bring them back to the place where they originated from, and then that, of course, gets the farmers all stirred up even more than the cow just disappearing. You know, because if the cow disappeared, you might think somebody stole it, rustled it, or something like that. But when you find half of it gets dropped out back in the field, it's pretty painful and very creepy.
And if it was the military, they could just go to a slaughterhouse and I'm sure buy cattle and take them to a military facility and perform those and throw out the garbage after, the leftovers.
Well, and the only thing that the conventional thinking on that is that they're doing some kind of like environmental study, like, you know, what the long-term effects of radiation or some that kind of thing might be the reason that they're doing that. It doesn't, like I say, I'm not an expert in it. I've never done one, thank God. But I know people that have done them and talked to them about it and how they do it and all that kind of thing. But I don't know.
And some of the time these things are dropped on their back with their feet up in the air. So for the people that claim that these are Satanists or whatever, it'd be very difficult for them to perform these type of surgeries without access to very expensive equipment.
Yeah, most of the stuff that, you know, the research that I've seen is you can see they're cut. It's like cut with a laser or something. And then, you know, you said the blood's drained and all that kind of stuff. It's very weird.
This is a good question from Hubert. What do you think about ufologists calling other ufologists disinformation agents? How does the average person figure who to believe and who not? Now, I've even been called a disinformation agent, and I've interviewed Nick Pope, the former head of the British UFO
yeah, I know.
desk. And there's so many comments every day on his videos Nick Pope is a disinformation agent. So, what are your thoughts on Pubert's question there?
Well, I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but sometimes ufology is like if you ever look in an alligator pit, and they're all like, you throw a stake in there and they're all jumping on top of each other trying to get it. So there's a certain amount of that mentality going on. And it's always been like that. In ever since I've been involved in this, there's always been a lot of infighting that occurs between the different researchers. I'm sure tomorrow somebody will be, trashing my book, but I've been doing it long enough. I don't care anymore. But I think part of it has to do with, if you look at how this disinformation works, no matter, in doing my research for the books, you run across certain recurring themes. And in general, I would say that, when you talk like to the astronauts and some of the stuff that they've seen on the moon, and they'll all tell you the CIA is the one covering it up. And some of these researchers that I've met that like worked in the FAA, and they'll tell you it was CIA people come and took the tapes and said, don't ever talk about this again. So the CIA has had a very strong hand in disrupting a lot of this stuff, and I think some of them they infiltrate groups, and guys that have been out there speaking, I've had them disrupt my meetings before. And, I vividly remember up in Washington, I got into it with this guy. And before I got up, one of my friends who was a government employee said he wrote CIA on the piece of paper and pointed at the guy. And I'd seen this guy around before. And basically it was when I was running the Bigelow project, and they asked me to speak, and he just kept this up. He just kept disrupting me. He asked me the same question over 5 times. And that was his job. And those people, they're government agents. They're extremely well paid. You work for the CIA, you make $300,000-$400,000 a year. And I'm doing this for free, driving up there to give a lecture, burning my own gas and not getting paid for it. And there's this guy that's going to try to trash my event. But I think that a lot of them have infiltrated these groups, and a lot of them, I think, are responsible for some of the, like the infighting that's going on. If that's just my opinion, but I'm pretty sure that, a lot of that is just people that are their job is to disrupt things, and they do it. Anytime you hear anybody start up about conspiracy theory, they're probably CIA.
Yeah, one thing I have found as I've done more of these interviews and put more videos out is there is a lot of infighting and politics in the UFO community.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's I think, well, I don't know if I want to go or not. Okay, what the hell? Here's the deal: is a lot of these organizations, like for example with MUFON, the most important thing, and I've conveyed this in my book, it's a good organization. I learned a lot doing it, and there's a lot of people that use their systems and learn a lot, and they do a lot of great investigative work. But I think behind the scenes is they have built this incredible database. It's called CMS, but basically, for 30 some, Project Blue Book ends and MUFON starts at the exact same time. And the whole time that I was involved with them, no one could ever explain where the money came from to build this server that runs their database. And their server's fast and slow down. So it's a big, huge, powerful, well-maintained server somewhere, but nobody could ever explain who paid for it or who was maintaining it. And I think that a lot of that, the most important thing to them is to get these people to propel these organizations, because the most important thing is when people report sightings. So right now, if you go out and you're driving home tonight and you see, flying saucer or a triangle comes right over your car and scares the hell out of you, when you get home and you go report a UFO, boom, MUFON's going to come up, and you're going to go in there, and like I said, it's going to give you a report form. It's going to ask you all kind of questions about what happened, how it happened, and you'll think it's it's pretty impressive because they're going to ask you a lot of questions about things you felt that you didn't think about it when it was happening. Okay. And it's really well done, extremely well done. And you're going to file that report. And that's really the backbone of that organization. That's what they're there for, you know? And so the powers to be that are running that, it seems like they turn people over all the time. And the reason is, I think they don't really care because the database is what they're trying to keep going. And in all fairness to them, I mean, it's a hell of a system and it really works. And, you know, if you're an investigator and you're in MUFON, you're going to get to see a lot of really cool stuff and a lot of interesting stuff, and you're going to learn a lot of stuff. And so it's worth it. But, you know, there's probably a back door there where somebody's taking advantage of that information as well. But I think a lot of that kind of caused some of the infighting like that is like, it seems like when people are there for a long time, they seem to turn over. You know, there was a wave right when I was involved with the STAR team, like there was probably 20 of us that just got kicked out of MUFON all at the same time. You know, the state directors and stuff like that. They were cleaning house, and then they put people in there that, you know, weren't experienced and you know, as long as they keep that database going, that's you know, if that's blasphemy, so be it. But that's, I think, a lot of what they're doing.
Brett is wondering if you could elaborate any more on the human mutilations that you're aware of.
Well, again, it's very rare, and from time to time, people sometimes will send you information, which I had received some pictures that it was a female in I think it was France, and really gruesome, and I really didn't want. I really didn't have any firsthand information on it other than the photos and the person that sent it to me. So I didn't investigate the case or anything. So I'm not going to just randomly talk about something unless I know what I'm talking about. In this case, I really don't, other than the fact it's just pretty horrible. And it's also something that, you know, I couldn't really authenticate it either. So to put it out in the public domain like that without knowing for sure if it's real or something, I really don't want to, you know, I don't want to dance to that romance. And it will do no public good. You know, if it is real, it'll scare the hell out of people if they see that, and that's not, you know, what we want.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the various species of aliens. How did you become aware of this? And could you talk a little bit more about the ones, for instance, you mentioned the Greys, and you said there's others that, according to reports, look more like us, and you couldn't really tell whether or not they're not from here or not. But as far as you're aware, could you tell us a little bit about some of the different species that may exist and how you've become aware of these various species?
Sure. First of all, I've not had any personal contact with any of these guys. Okay. But what I have done is I've interviewed a lot of people over the years that have, you know, people that have had close encounters, had abduction experiences, and I've interviewed a bunch of them. And so what I know about different species is based on what these people told me and how I conceptualized what they said. So you interview someone and they say that they were taken to a ship and that they were taken by these little guys that are like 4 feet tall with big heads. We call them Greys. And when they got in the ship, there was also a humanoid looking person, a big guy, maybe 6'2", something like that. Totally normal looking guy that if you passed him on the street, you never think twice about it, was also in there. But the only thing I know about different life forms is what other people have told me. And there's obviously a variety of them, you know, anything from humanoid looking, the Greys. There's another group they call the Guardians, and they look like Greys, but they're like 6 feet tall. You hear that when you hear there's something about that Guardian thing that's very interesting. I'm not sure I have it all figured out yet, but if you hear somebody talk about Guardian, pay attention. There's something there to learn, I think. And so, yeah, that's it. There's different species and also the different types of vehicles, too. It's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the vehicles is it's...
Well, the different types of vehicles, you know, you've got these saucers that were real common back in the 60s and 70s. And then, you know, now a lot of the stuff is like triangle shaped. And honestly, I think some of the triangle stuff is experimental military stuff. Could be. And then you have the other side of this where you have these huge vehicles that are like, if you remember back the Phoenix Lights case, back in, this thing came over Phoenix and like thousands of people saw it. And the governor at the time, Simonson, they put a press conference out and they had some guy come out with this stupid alien suit on, and they were trying to make fun of it. And later on, the interview that he did after he wasn't governor anymore is like amazing, because he's basically telling us that when that happened, it scared the crap out of them because they didn't know what to do. This huge, he said he went out and viewed it, and it was a boomerang shaped thing with lights on it, and the wingspan was like more than a mile across. That's how big it was, and it came right over, hovered over Phoenix. He said we didn't know what to do. And he said then the Air Force came out later that night and started dropping flares so they could say, well, it was just air, to try to cover it up. And then he said right in time for the 11 o'clock news to pick it up, the Air Force buzzed over and dropped a bunch of flares to try to cover it. This is the governor telling you what was really going on behind the scenes. So they're just some amazing, some of the things that people see are huge. I interviewed a guy one time, and I'm quite sure he's telling me the truth. I knew him. And he said that he was and I think I wrote about it. I did write about it in the book. And basically he was working, he was an intelligence officer. He was in the military. When I met him, he was a bank officer, and real reliable, honest, no nonsense type person. And he said, they took him out one night. They rousted everybody up, did general alarm quarter at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and took everybody out to a beach somewhere. And so he goes, we're all standing around the beach. We have no idea why. And he goes, back then you're not going to argue with your commanding officer. You're just going to get up and go, So we're standing on this beach, and all of a sudden this huge thing starts coming down. He said it came down and it was maybe a couple thousand feet over us. He said you couldn't see the stars anymore. It covered the whole sky up. And I said, well, define huge for me. What do you mean by huge? And he goes, it was the size of a small strip mall shopping center. I was like, whoa, so there's some wild stuff out there.
Now, I've heard that some of the triangle ones seem to be almost surveying land. Have you heard anything like the Tic Tacs, the difference between the various? There, you mentioned there is the classic saucer, the more Tic Tac looking ones, the triangle ones, then like the massive motherships the size of a shopping mall. But any idea like on the difference that some of these craft might be? Are they just from different worlds possibly, or different areas of the galaxy, or is there actual purposeful differences to these craft?
Well, again, it's a matter of I think there's the reason I think there's different societies is because there's different entities involved and there's different craft types. And I think, the bottom line is they all probably have their different agendas too. The triangle shape, the more current triangle shape ones, I think some of those could be experimental military aircraft, but there's also some what were extraterrestrial crafts that were, that we're seeing, and I think they've done some back engineering with some of those things too. So yeah, I don't know. A lot of there's a lot of orbs that happen into a lot of these reports, and these orbs are people describe them like it looks like a glass ball, the size, and it looks like a glass ball with fire burning in it, kind of an orangish glowing kind of thing, and they're intelligently controlled. And some of them can be fairly large, and some of them can be, like the size of a basketball or football or softball, soccer ball. Like most of them describe that size of soccer ball, and that they zoom around, and there's been cases where I'm writing one right now about the lady. She gets out of her car, and this thing comes. It was in a cornfield. She noticed it. It comes zooming across and stops like 3 feet in front of her face. Scares the hell out of her, and her face was all sunburned, from it. But there's a lot of orbs, and a lot of researchers, I think, believe that the orbs are, like there's a mothership way up there somewhere, and the orb's like a probe, or a drone that comes down, and, it's whatever it's doing, it's checking you out or checking something out, or, and who knows what, what they're looking at. They're remember, we're in this um, we're in this third dimensional, time space reality, but at the same time there's other dimensional realities that exist simultaneously in the same space. So there could be things going on around us in our environment that we don't even know about because they're out of our dimensional reality, but somebody's very concerned about them for some reason. But I think most of what I've seen or in reports and read about is that the nuclear situation is probably the prime control. That's what they're most worried about.
What's your opinion on the men in black? Mo is asking, do they actually exist?
Well, they actually did exist. And in my first book, I started doing this research back in like the late 80s and early 90s. And I wrote in the first book, I wrote about a situation where we got involved in a case that was at it was an NSA base that had been closed down. Is in Van Hill. And there was this UFO abduction that allegedly occurred there. And so me and a team of guys went up there to interview them and look for trace evidence and magnetic signatures and all that stuff, typical investigation. Wrote a really nice report about it. As a matter of fact, I got an award from MUFON for the superior investigation for that year's, it's the plaque. I still have it. While I'm gone, my wife at the time was at home, and we lived in a gated community, and it's outside of Charlottesville. So you can't get in there unless your car has a thing on it to open the gates, or somebody invites you and then the police have to let you in. So anyway, I'm at this working on this case. She's at home with the dog. We have this big husky. He's like a 90-pound husky. Malamute, looks like a wolf. And we had a run in the backyard that came off our deck. So basically you go to the back deck, open the door to the deck and hook his collar on it. And then he could run around the backyard. So he's out there while I'm at this thing, and he's getting all anxious and wound up and scratching at the door. And so she goes and lets him out. And when she did, he ran to the end of his lead. He's up on his back legs and he's barking, and she looks, and there's a guy down in the woods with a walkie-talkie watching him, And so, yeah, I know. And then we did a little, and again, we went around, and I've got a picture of it. There was a surveillance van at the pub at the golf course that apparently after they were done watching me, they went get something to eat. But it definitely happened. They were definitely people watching you back then. Now they don't have to do that anymore because we're in the age of cell phones and stuff like that. We don't have to follow anybody. I can look at, first of all, you're going to file your report on their case management system. So I'll read everything that you put in there about it if I want to. And I can check your cell phone and see where you're going, who you're talking to, who you're texting, and all that kind of stuff. So there's no reason to follow anybody around anymore because they can use your phone and your computer system to figure out what you're doing, where you're doing, who you're talking to, and what you're talking about, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think that's happening anymore. But I clearly think that back in the day, there were people that, and it was a combination of, because I know for a fact, I've talked to some of these old guys that were government agents back then, and he said they did, they wore suits and they go around and interview somebody and try to scare the hell out of them and take their film and, get them to shut up about whatever they talked about and told them not to worry about it, swamp gas and all that stuff. But then there's also the men in black where these guys are like creepy pale. They're kind of pale and like automated almost looking. And I've reviewed and I've interviewed several people that had encounters with them. They're just like guys that are like really weird. And, there was some of the things I'm trying to remember, but like some of the things the person would talk about, they didn't seem to know what he was talking. Like the guy said something about eating spaghetti, and the guy didn't. He's like, it didn't compute. But anyway, yeah, there were. I don't know that's happening anymore. And they always drove black Crown Victorias. That was the Crown Victoria was the prototype for all the police cars. They had the big police interception, the really powerful police interceptor engines in them, and and all that kind of stuff. But all the government agents drove Crown Victorias back then too. So I don't know.
Big Tings is wondering, what do you think about the legitimacy of Bob Lazar?
Oh, I think he's for real. There's no question. I mean, he is. That's all there is to it. You know, I think that some of these guys, Lear and George Knapp have interviewed him. I mean, he's for real. Yeah. And, you know, of course, once he started talking about it, then all of a sudden, you know, his whole education gets erased and his credentials get erased and typical crap. But yeah, I always did think he was for real. And he's recently, I haven't been paying a lot of attention, but he's recently come out now in some shows and stuff and been interviewed again. But yeah, I think he's real.
Now, I've interviewed Travis Walton. That's probably one of the most publicized cases because they did the Hollywood movie about his abduction experience. He was a very unusual man in my dealings with him, but it certainly seems like he experienced something because he becomes very shaken when talking about it. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on his situation.
You mean on Travis? Oh, I know Travis well. I've been to a dozen conferences where I've met him and talked to him. We've been at dinners together, you know, with a group of people. I know him pretty well. I mean, I've talked to him a number of times. I think he's, you know, I mean, I think his story's real good. It's real. I believe it, you know, and I'm not usually going to say I believe somebody or not believe him, but the thing that if when you're looking at Travis, Jen Stein did this documentary about that case. It was like 20 years or later or whatever, but basically what they did is they went back and interviewed all these people that were involved in the original case, the sheriff, you know, that was in the movie, and all the other people involved, and the investigators, and interviewed them all. And they're basically, it's a pretty good document. They're basically telling the same story that they said the first time around in the movie. So that sort of pretty much authenticates it for me as far as that goes. But the documentary she's got out's really good. Interesting. And Travis is a good guy.
Now, what is your opinion on these alien implants that have allegedly been found with some abductees?
Okay, let me think the guy's name that was doing the research. It was Roger. Oh, crap. Give me a minute. I'll remember the name, but he was a doctor. And I met him at a couple of conferences. And basically what they were doing is the people that had abduction experiences, they do x-ray and find what looked like a kernel of corn, or like a kernel of rice, up inside somebody's sinus cavity somewhere up in here, something like that. There's other places like taking them out of people's legs and that kind of thing. And they're some kind of an implant. And he did that research, and they took them out. And the weird part about it is when they take them out, they sort of like melt or something. They kind of self-destruct. It was really weird, but they worked on, they pick up the electrical energy in the body, which powered them. And, you know, God only knows what they were doing to that person, or what kind of information that they were, you know, whatever kind of information they were kind of trying to get from them or give them, or I don't know. But yeah, there was some pretty interesting stuff that was done with that.
So you think it's just kind of like tracking as if we would track an animal?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing you got to remember is when you look at these abduction cases, you interview some of these people, and if you start digging into it, you'll find out that some of their family members had the same problem. You know, a woman that's been abducted 3 or 4 times. And then you find out her grandmother has been abducted too. The grandmother talked about these experiences that back then they didn't even have a clue what was going on, to what was happening to them, but they knew that these weird, creepy things were getting a hold of them. And I think that for whatever reason, the abduction research, whatever direction it takes you, I think that part of that is it has something to do with the family history. In other words, if they abducted your grandmother and abducted your mother, they're probably going to come and get you someday too. And they've got a way to figure out and track those people. which I don't have a clue how, but I'm just saying that some of the research indicates that people's a woman's mother or grandmother had also had abduction experiences.
Marion would like to know what you know about the alleged reptilian species of aliens.
Not much. I'm not other than drawings and stuff people have made. I've really not encountered that much with reptilians.
What are your thoughts on? I'm not going to talk about the alleged takeover of Antarctica that helped allegedly with World War II, but like there is lots of reports related to UFO activity over Antarctica and supposed bases in Antarctica hidden. What are your thoughts on that?
There's something going on there. Obviously I've never been there, and it's not somewhere where you can just easily go. But research indicates that there's a lot of activity down there, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on or has gone on down there the public doesn't have a clue about.
Have you heard of Charles Hall and his stories about these tall white species of aliens and his claim that he worked on a military base as a weather guy where supposedly these tall white species of aliens had a base within another military base?
The name, no, I've not crossed paths with him or no, I don't know that about that.
For people that maybe aren't that familiar with UFOs activity and want to learn more, obviously there's your books, which we put the links to in the description. But is there any cases that stand out to you that you feel are more credible than others if people want to look them up?
Well, there's a lot of stuff out there, and there's an unbelievable amount of information out there if you look for it. If you just go to Amazon and Google UFOs, you'll find book after book after book about it, and not only the types of cases that happen, but also different locations, and there's just a unbelievable amount of stuff that's out there, and I think you're probably going to see more of it now because the way things are, with this whole disclosure thing that's starting to open up, I think you're going to see more and more information about it. But there's just so many cases. It's like,
Are any of your books available for audio download through any of these audiobooks sites?
I think my books, if you get the Kindle version of the book, I think you can listen to that on Kindle. I'm not positive, but I think you can. How if you some books in Kindle, you can just click it and it'll read it to you. I think it won't be me reading it to you, but it's just like a digital voice reading it to you. I think some Kindles you can do that, I think, but I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that because I'm not sure. I'll have to go look into it now that you asked me.
Winding it down here, Freedom Man wants to know your opinion on the Battle of Los Angeles.
Well, I'm not a researcher in the sense that, like, people say, well, what about that historic case that happened in 1945? And I'm like, I haven't a clue, I don't research historical stuff that much. And most of the work that I've done is just basically face-to-face work with individuals and experiencers, or, working on cases and current cases and technology like that. So, I know there's a lot of stuff out there about that, and I really haven't studied it that much because I don't have time. I'm working on current things, but some of the historical cases, I didn't need that for any of my books. I wouldn't have researched it, but I know I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and there's a lot of good information about it.
What was your favorite investigation to work on of all the investigations you've done?
Wow, that's a hard question because I've done some. I've done a lot of stuff. Some of the early on, I would say some of the abduction cases I worked on were really fascinating. Um, One of the cases I tell you that we did when I was working on the Bigelow project, the Bass project, we did a case that happened up in Port Jarvis, New York. Basically, what happened is that this guy was in the medical field. He's driving home around Christmas time. He's listening to Christmas music in his new car in Mitsubishi, and as he's winding out, it was a country road on the way home, and he's winding through the country, and every time he comes up the top of the hill, he notices a light up there, and he gets down, and pretty soon he goes up, and the light's getting closer, and this goes on for a while, and pretty soon the light's getting real close. And so at some point, he sees this really big light right out up in the air, but getting closer to him. So he pulls his car over just out of curiosity to just try to figure out what the hell it is, and he's looking at it, and the thing gets real close to him, and we drew drawings of it, and basically it went right, it hovered over his car, and he couldn't see what it looked like. All he could see was the bottom of it, and it was like kind of it. He characterized it like as a big, almost like a fan blade that was rotating, like a rectangular shaped thing that was rotating, and it had multicolored lights on it. So when the thing gets right over his car, all of a sudden, bam, everything shuts off. The headlights go out, the dash lights go out, the music stops playing, his cell phone is dead, and he's sitting in his car in the dark, and this thing's hovering over him. And up till then, initially he was curious, and now he's starting to get scared. He's terrified. He's like, I remember him saying that, like, I didn't know what to do, whether I get out of the car and run or stay in the car. And the answer is always stay in the car. He still had his seatbelt on. He opens the car door. He looks up like that. And when he looks up, boom, it disappeared. And when it disappeared, I said, did it fly away or what? He goes, I don't know. The car was running again. And he said, I just put the car in gear and got the hell out of there. I stepped on the gas and got the hell out of there. I don't know what happened to it. It scared him really bad. But the thing is that it turned his car off, stopped the car. And then when it left, the car started running again. And that's a really good close encounter case. Well, we flew up there, sent Investigator up there, and he did the preliminary investigation. He told me when he got there, like the day after it happened, and he walked up to the car. He said, I put my hand out, and like 10, 11 inches away from the car, you could feel the static cling coming off it. The car was charged. Like if you open a cleaner bag with a wool sweater in it or something like that static, snappy stuff. And he said, you could feel it like 8, 10 inches away from the car with your hand. And of course, we did a lot of like instrument readings, and the car had a huge magnetic field around it, which sort of validated the guy's story, because something happened to make that car get charged like that. And it was really a fascinating case. And we put a lot of time in it. I went back 3 weeks later. It still had a pretty good field around it. And, it was just like, it was one of those cases where you had a really interesting story, but you had a lot of physical evidence to back it up. It's one of the best I've worked on.
I wasn't going to ask you this, but since you bring it up, where you say the answer is, do I get out of the car and run or stay in the car? Because you've talked to so many alleged abductees, if any of us somehow, for whatever reason, end up in some type of situation where an abduction might occur, what would be your advice?
I'll give you some advice, and it's in my book too. Basically, the thing is that, first of all, do not ever walk under a UFO that's hovering over you, because they work on an electrogravitic field that is kind of like microwave. If you walk under that thing, it'd be like sticking your hand in a microwave oven. You can imagine the tissue damage it can do. And people that have gotten out of their cars have been, ended up getting cancer and stuff like that from it. So the metal in your car will protect you a little bit from it. It's better than if you get out of the car. That's a really bad thing to do. Don't do it. Stay in the car, and do your best to stay from not getting underneath it. Also, if you encounter one of these crafts that's on the ground and it's still powered up, the metallic skin from that thing puts out an ultraviolet radiation that'll give you a really wicked sunburn on your skin. It's like sunburn. And it also, there have been cases where there's radiation that comes off of them. It's like in the X-ray spectrum that can cause radiation sickness and a lot of very serious health complications. So don't go up and walk up and try to touch it. Don't walk under it. And you want to keep some serious distance away from it. And also, there's a number of these cases where, I've encountered where people have that, million candle power spotlight that they use for, spotlight hunting deer at night, out in the country. The guy's got them in their pickup truck. Don't ever point one of them things at the craft, because it always ends up disastrously if you do. And it also will attract the attention of it too. So basically, don't point any kind of high intensity lights at them, and don't get underneath them, and don't touch them or get close to them. Not to mention that, if you do get close enough to them where they're aware you're there, they can use some kind of energy field to pretty much traumatize you, where they can get a hold of, it'll kind of put you in shock or something. You can't get away from them. So does that help? I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've heard even in the Travis Walton story, when he approached the craft, it shot him back like a lightning bolt. And of course, there's that famous one from Manitoba, Canada, here in Canada, where, as you mentioned, the guy did get radiation on him, and was actually medically treated for it when he found, I think it was called the Falcon Lake UFO case here in Manitoba.
Well, I think Travis told me that he thought that the reason they took him, he walked up underneath it and got zapped, and he thinks that they took him in there to save his life. He might have had like a cardiac arrest or something like that, and he thinks that they took him in there to revive him and give him medical treatment.
Stan is wondering if there is a continent that has the most UFO sightings that you're aware of.
I don't know. I think that the phenomena is pretty well worldwide, and it's just a matter of who's reporting it, and not only who's reporting it, but what country you're in. Like in South America, Mexico, they're real open to this stuff, and Jaime Massad and some of those people, just like, they're on TV all the time showing you videos and pictures of this stuff, because their media there is interested in it, and they're not like censored in any way. But if you go into other parts of the world where their governments are real tight, they're not going to let you see any of that stuff. So I think it has more to do with, as far as, I think they're probably they're probably all over the world, and it's just a matter of who's reporting and who's seeing them. But I don't think that there's any particular country or anything that attracts their attention more so than you'd be more inclined to see them around like nuclear weapons storage areas or missile silo places like that. I think there's that you could be sure that they're going to be around there once in a while.
There's a viewer here that mentions about what you were talking earlier, the UFO drawings being around since seemingly the beginning of time. Because they've been around so long, do you ever expect that they're going to show themselves more? Or, of course, like if we had a Phoenix Lights incident today, it'd be recorded so well that it wouldn't be as easily denied. But there is, of course, obviously a new species could come and find us that's more open to revealing itself, or have more negative intentions. But basically, I'm just wondering, do you think they're going to reveal themselves more in, let's say, the next 50 to 100 years? Or is it just going to be more of the same, with us maybe finding out more due to our technologies?
Well, I don't think that as far as them revealing themselves to us, I don't think that's the problem. I think the government doesn't want us to know about them, and they go out of their way to make sure that, you know, that we don't have any more contact with them than they can possibly manage. Okay, the short version is, you know, we look at recorded history. We're going to say, okay, let's go back 6,000 years to Sumerian times. So most of the history books and what's taught in schools is our human history is like 6,000 years old, which is obviously not true. The pyramids are probably 12, 15,000 years old, and somebody was around that built them. And I think if you look back, there's probably been humans, and I don't mean people that evolved from apes and monkeys, but cognizant human beings on this planet for 100,000 years. You know, and it's just we you know, we're probably some of the archaeology and some of the studies that are being done, and you know, it clearly I think that's what's happened. Now, what contact they've had with alien species, you know, I'm not even dumb enough to say what I think about that on air, but I think that, you know, they've been around a long time.
Do you think that these could have been what people interpreted as gods in the earlier days?
Oh, I'm sure that there was some of that going on. Yeah. Yeah. If these alien species came down, and I'm sure these people would be quite subservient to them based on the kind of technology they have and stuff, you know. Yeah, sure.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. Your latest book, the link is in the description, UFO Investigation, The Age of Disclosure. Anyone can just follow the links in the description to his other books. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. It was very informative. Maybe in the future we could have you on again, but I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to say to the viewers.
Well, I just thank you guys for taking the time to watch the show, and I appreciate the questions. And again, we're coming out with another book that's going to be about a lot of these cases. Some of them I've talked about, which it seems like most of the comments we get, people like, boy, I wish you had more information about cases and stuff like that. So we're working on one right now for the third one that's coming out, and it'll be part of the series. So you'll see it pop up when it does. But I enjoyed talking to you guys. This was a real nice interview format, and love to do it again sometime soon.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe